everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of The Fact, the series that discusses international issues every week. Today we're going to discuss about the Israel boycott, and we have two respected guests tonight with us. We have Faith Laugier from United States and also Raúl Fernández from Mexico. I would like to welcome both of you to the program. It is truly a great honor to have both of you on this episode. As you know, there has been a few years that few countries or few communities try to actually boycott the products of Israel. I would like to start with Faith. About the first question, what was the initial intention behind this whole boycott against Israel and its products?
I mean, the BDS movement seeks the freedom, justice, and basic human rights and self-determination of the Palestinian people. It's been nearly 70 years that they've not had their land since 1948, and for the past decades they say, oh, we're negotiating. Israel puts that front on that it's trying to push forward with a peace process, but it's actually Israel that's hindering and doesn't want to progress in any manner because many concessions have been made, particularly a lot of journalists I've heard say dozens of times, Hamas wants to destroy Israel, Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution, and actually that's, incorrect. Hamas actually changed the charter and remove the call for the destruction of Israel and agreed to a state along the lines of the 1967 borders, which is actually a huge concession. And it's Israel that won't agree to a state along those lines. And, because Israel is incrementally stealing land, killing, thousands of people, children, every year. I mean, look, in the last, year, over 220 Palestinians were killed during the Great March of Return protest. Well, that is why there's the need for the BDS movement, and that's why it was created, and that's why, it's here and needs more support. Without a doubt.
Perfect, thank you. So here I would like to go to the second question. Actually, Faith shed a light on the reasoning behind this whole movement. But Raúl, do you think this movement has declined, or it even got stronger after many years of its initiation?
Very much, Ali. This is a pleasure being with you guys. I really appreciate this opportunity. And yes, as it was wisely explained before, there's been over 70 years of Israel's illegal occupation, illegal land annexation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid and genocide conducted in historical Palestine, right? And many times I think of the BDS movement following the blueprints that were given to us in white supremacist South Africa, right? So I see the BDS movement as a continuation of what happened in South Africa. There's been very few examples of apartheid states in the recent, let's say, 200 years. I can think of a few only. It would be the United States under Jim Crow laws, white supremacist South Africa, Nazi Germany, and Zionist Israel, right? So how are we supposed to combat against an oppressor who has all the weapon support and logistical support from the United States? Obviously, it's going to be through non-violent means. And even Israel Israel Minister of Finance, Yair Lapid, has admitted that Israel is much more at risk through the boycotts that the BDS movement is promoting than under any military intervention, right? So many times I tend to compare the BDS movement to the Black Liberation Movement. And I look in the conditions in which our African American brothers and sisters are living in these United States, right? And they are delegated to just lower their head, tuck tail, and obey the laws of the establishment, right? It's very similar to what happens in Palestine. If you rebel in violent ways, you are condemned. And if you rebel in peaceful ways, you are condemned. Hence, the only option they're leaving to us is to lower our tails and resign ourselves for genocide, something which the Palestinian people is not willing to admit. And they have thousands, if not millions, of supporters around the world that are not going to let this happen.
The regime that it's proven itself to be unwilling to, budge an inch. And, exactly like your other guest, Raúl, said, ethnic cleansing. I mean, it's, bordering, I mean, on genocide. It really is. And I mean, Israel doesn't even have borders. They have no official declared borders, and they're like incrementally stealing exactly all of historical Palestine, and with no stop in sight. I mean, Netanyahu has made it clear that he doesn't want a two-state solution, and he will not allow the return of who they made refugees. So it's yes, in my opinion, it's necessary to boycott Israel on all levels, economically, culturally, academically, scientifically. And, so that includes, boycotting all products, boycotting their writers, people who aren't, and I wouldn't say all writers, because I'm not going to say all Israelis, because there are Israelis that are actually against what their government is doing, but institutions and companies and organizations that support the right-wing government and won't, stand up for Palestinian rights, then yes, they should be and need to be boycotted. I mean, in my opinion, what's necessary is more of a global movement, because BDS now has been around for how many years, and it is growing, which is a good thing. But it reminds me kind of Occupy Wall Street. It started here in New York City, and it grew and became nationwide, but it was ineffective because it would be, one event this day, October 15th, another event this day, November 10th in another city. What has to be organized, in my opinion, and it's to show the solidarity of the people and the, will of the people in whole, in full force, to really make a statement for Israel and the world to see. That's what's necessary here. And so, it's basically along the lines of organizing internationally a day to boycott Israel, in major cities across the world, go to, I mean, I would say maybe the Israeli embassies of each of the countries, each of the states' cities, and make sure that there's a coordinated time for these boycotts to occur, and to have media presence alerted to the event, and it becomes an international, not only a national but an international event that puts the spotlight on Israel and their actions, and how the people of the world do not support what's going on. This is the kind of support that the Palestinian people need, that they deserve. It's decades and decades of brutal assassination, brutal murder, brutal, it's genocide. It's genocide. I mean, we're living in a world that they're allowing a modern day, and it's surpassed apartheid South Africa. Gaza, Palestine, it's worse than apartheid South Africa was. Babies are being killed, children are being killed in the thousands. And the ingrained racism and the subjugation is worse. Gaza's controlled all around by air, sea, land, and cut off from Palestinian territory that Israel's illegally occupying. So this, it has to come to an end, and the people need to make clear their complete objection, their complete, non-allowance of things to progress any further. And it needs to be done in a manner that really shows that the world is watching, the world is aware, and the world will not allow this to occur any longer. And that's what I think needs to occur.
Well, you perfectly mentioned, the Wall Street movement, that, as you said, it didn't have much of effect and outcome. And now I would like to go to our next question about the results that BDS movement has had so far. And so, Raúl, do you think BDS movement was,
Thank you, Ali. Yes, absolutely, right? It's important for some of the audience that may not be that familiar with the BDS movement to understand what the acronym stands for, right? So you have boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I think the part that is missing here in the movement has been the sanctions part, for obvious reasons. Who are those who impose the sanctions in the world? The United States, one of the most destructive entities in modern history, right? We have heard how Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State of Bill Clinton, was proud about the fact that 500,000 Iraqi children died during the sanctions imposed by the Bill Clinton's government, right? So who imposes the sanction is something we have no control of. Now, we do have some control about the boycott part and the divestment parts, right? So some universities and other institutions have done divestment from Israeli companies, and that has an effect. Obviously, the boycott that we can do at smaller scale has a big effect, right? There is a Bob Marley song that says, if you're a big tree, I am a small axe, willing to cut you down. So sometimes the empire and all these imperialistic forces can be brought down by small cuts from all over the place. So we can do what is in our hands, right? The cultural boycott of Israel, and then we had people with double standards, like Bono from U2, who was very adamant about boycotting white supremacist South Africa. However, he has no problem going to Israel and playing for war criminals like Shimon Peres, calling them a man of peace and whatnot. I personally have lost a lot of respect for artists that I used to like, who didn't care to go about to Israel to entertain people in Israel. One of them is Carlos Santana. Another one is a Spanish singer and songwriter, Joaquin Sabina. I used to love pop artists. Now I'm not. I'm boycotting all their products because they should know better what they were doing. They knew better what they were doing and they didn't care. On the other hand, you have some artists like Sinead O'Connor, who was offered an awful lot of money to go to Israel and play and entertain the genocidal state, and she had the ethics to deny and say, I'm not going there. And obviously, we don't need to talk about people or activists like Roger Waters, right, who have been critical in moving this project of cultural boycott to Israel forward. Of course, it requires a lot of courage for someone like him to go up front and confront the genocidal state of Israel, because we know that that's the way many careers are ended. Once you open your mouth against the criminal actions of Israel, that's pretty much like a death sentence. So that's why I believe these people are are worth their weight in gold. Same as those few dissidents in Israel who oppose what their criminal state is doing. So I do believe there's a lot of future in this movement. Marches, rallies, peaceful manifestations of that kind have very limited effect. Don't get me wrong, I've been an activist all my life. I've been in zillions of marches and rallies. But at the end of the day, these marches and rallies, they only make you feel better. That's it. That's where it starts. That's where it ends. On the other end, economic boycott has an effect. So I'm going to use my money as a weapon. That is the part that is very important about BDS movement. And then obviously all of us share this responsibility to spread the message to the rest of the world and put it in terms that they can relate to in order for them to engage and make this movement growing. So just to answer your question, I don't believe this movement is going anywhere. It's only going to get stronger.
Thank you so very much. Here actually comes the next issue, because as you so far explained perfectly about the history of the movement, obviously Israel tried to actually confront this kind of movement in these many years. I would like to ask Faith about the examples of the possible confrontations that Israel tried to have against this movement, and if they were effective or not.
I can definitely say from what I've seen in the last years, the Israeli lobby has most definitely ramped up its work in the U.S., with the U.S. acquiescing to the most unbelievable actually abrogations of the rights of U.S. citizens with the certain laws that have been passed. More recently, I believe it was either January or February of this year, legislation was passed in the U.S. Called the Anti-BDS Act. And basically, in the United States, presently, there are 26 states in which it's illegal to boycott the state of Israel. Now, this is insane because American citizens have the right to boycott any American company, any company in the world, really, except any company in Israel. And they can lose their job. And it's already happened. It's happened to people already. A woman, I believe she was a speech pathologist in Texas. There's a case with a newspaper. I mean, this is insane. A newspaper. They wanted a newspaper to sign an agreement saying that they would not take part in any economic boycott or in any boycott of Israel. And thank goodness, I don't know if it was the editor or who it was in this paper, had the, I don't know if it was the morality, the insight, but thank goodness they said, I'm not signing this. And now, it's presently a case that's in court, but I'm not sure I mean, I certainly hope the outcome will be that this is not constitutional. This violates our U.S. citizens' First Amendment rights to free speech, to, choice. People have the individual right to choose who they support and who they don't support. That just goes to show the collusion between how desperate the state of Israel is, and what a lackey, really, the politicians of the United States are willing to be for the state of Israel, to sell out their own citizens and the rights, it's constitutional rights that they're abrogating with these laws that they're trying to pass. That, thank goodness, the American Civil Liberties Union is, taking these cases on. So I think it just shows the desperation that Israel, and their fear. So what it's going to take to counteract these things is always the people. The people are the ones who have the power. The people have the numbers. The people, if everyone does boycott Israel, they can't do anything. Are they going to jail us all, really? No, I don't think so. But they'll threaten everyone with it. And that's the thing. They use fear tactics. And humanity needs to stop, letting, this handful, I mean, it's the 1%. 1% of the world controls, actually 1% of the world has more than the 99% combined. I mean, this is the extreme greed that we're dealing with and talking about. And the lengths that these people, these monsters, are willing to go to maintain their power, it's so many layers of subjugation and entrapment and enslavement. But what holds it all together for them is fear. And that's what the people of the world need to overcome.
Actually, you mentioned a very interesting point about counteracting toward this, toward the ways that Israel is trying to confront this movement. And also, Raúl previously mentioned that marches are not so effective, concerning this movement, and it's basically the main economic sanctioning which is gonna get actually more effective. So, Raúl, do you think? Do you have any other suggestions or complementary suggestions for improving the activities regarding this boycott or not?
I think I do have a few suggestions. So the first one, I've been working in social services for a number of years with people in the streets, with homeless, people with mental health, substance abuse, you name it, all the destitutes of the United States. And my advice is not that different to what I give newcomers into the field. You have to put this fight, you have to make this war happening without attachment. This is like a long-term race, right? This is not going to get solved in 2019, probably not in 2020 either. So this is a long run. We have to put this fight, we have to be constant in it, and we have to do it without attachment. We don't need necessarily to see the end result, because somebody will see the end result. We're just planting the seeds that somebody else will harvest. Nothing in the world, or in the universe for that matter, lasts forever. That is like a law, a principle of nature. Nothing lasts forever, nor the rocks, nor injustice, right? So at some point, this is all going to end. BDS is just one tool in the toolbox. That's the way I want to see it. It's not necessarily the only weapon in the toolbox that we're going to use to defeat the apartheid state, but it's just one tool in the toolbox, right? So here we're talking about Israel, when I refer to it as an apartheid state, some people have objections, but It's a fact. It's an easily verifiable fact. There is about 67 discriminatory laws against non-Jewish people, right? So we're talking many times people refer to Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East, which is not only a cliche, but is inaccurate, right? Because Israel is not a democracy, but it's rather an ethnocracy based on race, or a theocracy based on religion, but certainly it is not a democracy, right? Just look at the way Ethiopian Jews are treated in Israel, which they're like the direct descendants of King Solomon and Queen Sheba, right? They're put in detention camps in Israel, or immigrants from Eritrea who are Jewish. So no, it's an ethnocracy, and the way to end this ethnocracy, this theocracy, is going to be in part through the economic boycott, but also I believe that the end of this state is going to come through implosion, because it's an unsustainable Frankenstein experiment. It's an arbitrary state that exists in the Middle East, created by white European Jews, right? So here we are, like the questions that everybody should be asking when we're talking about Israel. Basis for the creation of Israel oftentimes are the Holocaust, the World War II Holocaust, right? So we're talking in World War II, like probably 70 million died. And why are we only concerned about this number of 6 million Jewish? How about all the rest? And then you have to ask all the other questions, right? Who perpetrated the Holocaust? Europeans. Who were the victims? Europeans. Where did it take place? In Europe. So why on earth should the Palestinians be paying with their blood, their land, their martyrdom, and their children the crimes of Europeans committed to other Europeans in Europe? It doesn't make any sense. This is, as I mentioned before, a Frankenstein experiment that is destined to fail. And I can see the traces of implosion all over, because many times it's easy to talk about the problems, but it's very hard to talk about the solutions, right? So everybody talks to the two-state solution versus the one-state solution. Okay, we can argue that by all intended purposes, the two-state solution is a dead-end alley, right? But let's talk about it for just 1 second about the two-state solution. If we're talking about the two-state solution, like all U.S. politicians often throw out there as a cliche, or as some people in Israel suggest, we need to obey international law. So we have to go back to 1948 borders. Those are the only ones admitted by international law. Since 1948, it is forbidden to gain territory through war. Hence, the 1967 borders are bogus. So if it's a two-state solution, it has to go back to 1948. And if it's a one-state solution, then the Jewish people are minority, because they are minority, right? And then we have to observe the right of return, like Faye mentioned earlier, right? So we have a Palestinian diaspora of 6-7 million people around the world that cannot go back to their homeland. However, you have like immigrants from all parts of the world. I visited like Palestine, and I realized, like I was in Bethlehem in the West Bank, and I saw all these injustice firsthand. It's nothing that they just told me or I read. I witnessed all this firsthand, and that's the only way to end it: to put like this fight constant, hard, be tenacious, and not to be attached to the end result.
Thank you, Raul. You also, explain about how to, define the future of this movement and also Israel. But Faith, I would like actually to go into more details about what and how will be the future of Israel. Do you think this entity will stay or not? And if it stays, how it will be the situation with Palestinian people and also Israelis within this entity?
I mean, that's quite a question, and there's just a number of factors at play. You have the hopes of, some of the people looking to build a third temple, and you know, then you have Messianic Christians who are, looking toward the second coming. And then you have prophecy that talks about Jerusalem in the future. And I'm saying being the place where many things occur. One of them being where, the Antichrist has his seat. So, I mean, in my opinion, Israel is already, Israel has been digging its own grave since 1948, in my opinion. There are a number of Jews who believe that Israel actually has no right to build a state until the coming of the Messiah. Yet they're building a state. And this is based on the biblical, and actually it's also mentioned in the Talmud, fact that, and I'm saying fact that this is written in the Old Testament, referred to in the Old Testament, that basically God took away the state of Israel and said that he would cast the Israelis out as like sand and scatter them around the world. And that they weren't to return en masse, and that they could only return when the Messiah came and brought them to Jerusalem, to Israel. But as you can see, they've transgressed those two basically commands that were put on them, not to return until the coming of the Messiah, and not to build a state. And they're doing that, also violating a number of the 10 Commandments. They're coveting, they're stealing, they're killing. So they're building this state on blood. So yes, I do think Israel is going to lose either every single way in any outcome that I can see. But my worry is for the Palestinian people, and alleviating as much as humanly possible the conditions that they have, that they're forced to live under. I mean, so many people, say, oh, nobody did anything for the Jews when, Hitler came and was around, and it took so long. Well, you know what? There's a current Holocaust going on, and the world is guilty for the last decades of doing nothing. So, yes, I'm glad there's people that are waking up and are moving to try to, help the plight of the Palestinian people, the decades long, misery, subjugation that they've, been living under, the loss, I mean, the deaths that they deal with on a daily basis. Today's Ramadan. And I mean, look, in the last 2 days, 11 people and 200, or 11 people were killed and 200 wounded in 2 days. And they want to say, oh, Hamas rockets. There were 0 Israelis dead. Hamas has bottle rockets, okay? They don't have missiles. Israel has missiles, and so that's why in 2 days there are 0 Israelis dead, 11 Palestinians dead, 200 injured, and I mean, and this has been going on for decades. I mean, if we look at the statistics, I think it's 24 Israelis have been killed in the history of Hamas existing. And even before Hamas was created, I believe it was 1987. Um, they had no, rockets before that, and it was Israel uh, missiling, bombing Gaza and Palestine, and nobody said anything and did anything. So I know Hamas is used as, this boogeyman, as this scapegoat. But the fact is, Hamas is a democratically elected government, number one, and it has the right to protect their people, their sovereignty, and their country like any other government on the face of the planet. And not only that, but Palestinians have the right under international law to protect and defend themselves from an occupying force, which is exactly what Israel is under international law. And they're trying to do their best to do that, but they need the help of humanity. And that's what the people of the world need to engender, is humanity. We need to care about what's going on. I mean, we live in a world that people just concern themselves with their own lives and very little of what's occurring and, happening to other people. And there's no place on the planet. I mean, I think, Yemen in the last year, has reached a critical point. But Palestine, for the last 70 years, has been an ongoing nightmare. And they're the only people on earth that don't have self-determination. They're the only people on earth that can't get on a plane and they not only can they not just go on a plane and go somewhere, they can't cross and go to a hospital without Israel's permission. They can't take their boat out onto the beach and fish if Israel doesn't allow them to. Or like says, oh, you can't, or will shoot them if they go out past some imaginary boundary Israel creates. I mean, they live in an open air jail. It's criminal. It's illegal, but yet it's been going on for decades, and it's time for humanity to say enough is enough. It's time for humanity to move to help the Palestinian people.
Thank you. Right. I would like also, if you don't mind, I would also go ahead with also Raúl about the same question. Faith perfectly explained almost all aspects regarding the future of Israel, also this movement. I would also like to have your opinion, Raúl, about the potential.
So this is something that I try to stay away from it. But that being said, they say that the best predictor for future behavior is past behavior, right? So many times by reading history, we can read the future. So Faye was talking about it, like this occupier, like basically, like I think the debate has to always be centered around international law. That's where it all starts. That's where it all ends. Everything else is almost a distraction, right? So under international law, the occupier has two obligations. One is to withdraw, and the second one is to protect the civilian that they're occupying, of the land they're occupying. On the other hand, the occupied people, by international law, have the right to defend themselves by any means necessary. So as long as we keep the discussion always centered around international law, we're starting in really good foundation. So now talking a little bit, speculating a little bit about the future of Israel. Let's think about it. It's not that different to what we're observing in the demographic wars in the United States and the border with Mexico and Central America and Latin America, right? White Americans are not reproducing at the rates that Latinos are. When you look at what's happening in Europe, right? White Europeans are not reproducing at the rates that Africans, Middle Easterns, and other people are reproducing. So here we're going to have like cases similar to what is happening in Spain, like for instance, right? Spain is a nation that tends to be sometimes a little bit xenophobic, to put it in real terms. So they have this problem with migrants. They do not want migrants from North Africa and the Middle East or Latin America for that matter. They really oppose them, right? But what's happening, their population are getting old as we speak. There are entire ghost towns that they're selling for next to nothing because there's no people there. And that is what we see in Europe. That is what we see in the States. Who's going to do the work? The immigrants. And what is happening in Israel? They're like having to import Jewish from other parts of the world, from Argentina, from Uruguay, from every part of the world, from India, you name it, right? So here we have a state that is artificially created, and like anything that has been artificially created, is not sustainable. So it's just a matter of time before they accept true democracy, in which every person, regardless of race, regardless of religion, ethnic background, and whatnot, is guaranteed 100% of the obligations and 100% of the constitutional rights as everyone else, 100% of access to the law, to the land. And that includes not only the people currently living in occupied historical Palestine, which is a lot of European Jews, some Sephardic Jews, and then we have Bedouins, Palestinians, Jewish from North Africa, as I mentioned earlier, Eritrea, Ethiopia, some from Sudan. So either we guarantee 100% of the rights to all these people, but also we have to keep in mind the 6 or 7 million Palestinians out there in the diaspora. They have the right to return. The right to return is non-negotiable. That is written in the international law. Israel wants to be an exception to the law. There is no reason why we should tolerate that kind of message, right? In the United States, there is this fever now about bullying in the schools, right? Like you cannot impose your force and your will through violence through the weak. However, when it comes to the international community, the United States has no problem portraying this image that bullying is all right. So is Israel, right? They're like, historically speaking, Western European countries, the United States and Israel have been the bulliest of the planet. And that has to come to an end. It's not sustainable.
I'm truly thankful to both of you, Faith from the United States and also Raúl from Mexico. It was truly a great and informative program with both of you. And also I would like to say that our listeners and viewers can also follow our program on our YouTube channel. Thank you everyone and goodbye.